This is an overview of a vendor portal that was created for Syteline ERP, which is a software package put out by Infor. So one of the first things I want to touch on is what type of vendors this portal is geared towards. This portal is geared towards vendors that provide outside processes. So it's not the typical scenario where a product is purchased from a vendor and then it's delivered and received. It's not meant for that. It's meant for scenarios where a company or organization is producing a finished good, and one of the steps of producing that product needs to be provided by an outside vendor. So in our scenario, we're a wire and metal manufacturing organization, and we have finish put on our product, such as plating or painting that we have done by outside um, service providers, platers or painters. So what this portal is meant to do is enhance how the two companies integrate together to provide that outside service and the information required to do it. So that is what this vendor portal was geared towards, and those types of vendors, not typical vendors of that produce that supply um, miscellaneous production supplies or things of that nature. The way that this application was built was we started out looking at some of the needs we have internally and visiting many of our suppliers that provide these outside services and looking at the needs that they have, and then looking at how the two organizations were working together well, and then how they were not working together well, and some of the gaps that occurred. And through that process, we put together a program that kind of separates the application into two different functional components. And those are, one, how we communicate information to our vendor, and then two, how the vendor communicates back to us about that information. And the the first way, the first portion of it, how we communicate with the vendor, is accomplished through customer orders, purchase orders, and transfer orders. So a customer order in the scope of this vendor portal is really about shipping product to our customers. In our current model, what we have is these outside suppliers actually shipping product directly to our customers. So we send them um, a piece of formed wire, they put a finish on it, and then send it directly to our customer. So the customer orders is a way for us to communicate all the order information that the customer has given us, and and so that they can comply with those requirements. Now, previous to this application, the main form that we had for doing that was giving our suppliers access to our customers' website where we normally gather that information. In a sense, what we've done with that is delegate the order creation process or order fulfillment process to our supplier. And that came with certain problems inherent in doing that, which we look to resolve with this vendor portal. So one of the objectives was to bring customer orders back on site, and us manage those orders, and then have our vendors looking at our website instead of our customer's website for the pertinent information. The other portion was purchase orders. So purchase orders take on another meaning in the scope of this application, and they're really a task list. So we've got a particular job that we've sent to a supplier site, and it may or may not um, need to be completed right away, and that information is conveyed via a purchase order. So we create a purchase order, and that's in essence a task that we're asking them to complete. So they receive product on their shipping dock, and there's a purchase order that goes with it stating, hey, we want you to plate this. That purchase order, when it's completed, is acknowledging that the work has been done. That's finished goods, and 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 we know then what is completed at their site and what is completed, what is not completed. So prior to this application, we really had no way of knowing the product that was finished and the product that was unfinished without some sort of list emailed to us. The implementation of the purchase orders, basically states, hey, go ahead and do this job, and then when you're done with the job, let us know so that we know in real time what we have in finished goods sitting on your site. So that's the idea behind the purchase orders. Transfer orders are really there's two parts to the transfer orders. So through some of our discussions with our suppliers, we had scenarios where number one, they wanted to know what was arriving on their dock. So, uh, you know, the only way that they could find that out is if they called us or we called them or an email was sent somewhere along the line saying, hey, we're sending a truckload of product to you. Um, and so the transfer orders are a way for them to get a visibility into what sort of product is going to be arriving at their site. And the other part of the transfer orders um, was that there's products sitting on my location. Say I'm a supplier and there's products sitting at my location and it's not moving. I don't see any customer orders for this. I want to get it off of my location. I want to send it back to you. Well, a transfer order request can be done, which in essence is saying, hey, I want to move this stuff off of my site, and it formalizes that process. Whereas before, it was more of a call and ask, hey, can I send this stuff back to you? Well, we'll get back to you on that. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. The transfer orders in that regard helped formalize that whole process. So those are the three methods that, in essence, are what the vendor portal uses to communicate information to the supplier. Customer orders, we want this sent to our customer. Purchase orders, we need these tasks accomplished. And transfer orders, hey, we want to send inventory to your site, or we want inventory sent from your site to us. So those are the three main mechanisms for how we communicate with the supplier in the vendor portal. And there's the other part. There's how that vendor then communicates with us. So each one of those modules, the customer order, purchase order, and transfer order, has types of vendor requests that can be created based off of them. So if you're looking at customer orders, a CO shipment can be done right here, or a CO late request. So a CO shipment would be if I've got a customer order, I see it in the system, and then I ship on it. Now I'm letting you know through a CO shipment vendor request that that product has left the facility, and so we can go ahead and ship on the orders. And each one of these categories has a specific meaning within the context of how we're communicating with the vendor. So a customer order will have a corresponding CO shipment or CO late request, to respond from the vendor to us on what's going on with what we communicated initially to the vendor, i.e. the customer order. So we communicate a customer order, they respond with a vendor request. We create a purchase order, and they respond with a PO vendor request, PO receipt or PO late request. We create a transfer order, they respond with a transfer order shipment or transfer order receipt request. So each one of these main modules has a corresponding vendor request that can be associated with it inside the vendor portal. And that's the method that is primarily used for our supplier communicating back to us with what we've communicated to them. And then there's a catch-all function of notes. So notes, each vendor request can be annotated with notes, and then also each one of these purchase orders, customer orders, or transfer orders can be annotated with notes. And notes on the vendor request are outside of Syteline application. Okay, so any notes that are tagged with any one of these vendor requests do not touch the Syteline ERP system. However, notes that are done on customer orders or purchase orders or transfer orders is actually the only way that the system tightly integrates with Syteline. So those notes are absolutely tightly integrated in a bidirectional manner with the notes inside Syteline. So on a customer order, the vendor portal grants access to notes that are created on the order header, on the order line, or the order release. And with purchase orders, it's the same thing. Notes are made available or can be made available on the purchase order header, on the purchase order line, on the purchase order release. And with transfer orders, there are no blanket transfer orders. So it's just notes that are available in the transfer order header and the transfer order line. But notes notes do integrate tightly with Syteline, and that's the only real interaction that occurs between the system other than read-only access to these three modules here in customer orders, purchase orders, and transfer orders. So, and I'll dive into these topics in more depth in later videos. This video is meant to provide an overview of the portal and how it all kind of flows together. But my plan is to create separate videos on customer orders, separate videos on purchase orders, and separate video on transfer orders, and possibly even an administration or developer video that will document some of the more technical details of the system. But this video is meant to give an overview. So with that being said, I'd like to move on and show a little bit of a demonstration as to what occurs inside this application. Now here is the home page for a vendor portal that I have up in a test environment running on my local machine. It's the basic look and feel that I wanted uh, for as a generic template. And this is, of course, can be customized in any way a person would like. Um, the source code is available on my GitHub account to download the application and make any changes that might be fit for your organization. But it can be themed in any way that anybody would like to have done. This is the basic generic home page that I've put on for our live system. And this is not a copy of our live system. This is a test environment that I have up and running so that I can give demonstrations on. But this is just the plain old home page. And you'll see that I have a link here for home. Obviously, it's the only link that's available right now. When you log in to the system, based on your permissions, you will have other links available to you. And I'll show you that once we log in. But first I want to show you the register link, which provides an area for anybody who looks to have access to the site can go on ahead and register right here, and their information will then be submitted to a database which can be reviewed and an account can be created. Now, it's important to note that even if somebody registers, once somebody registers, they will be able to log into the site, but they will not be able to see any information because until an administrator goes in and assigns an actual warehouse to the individual, they won't see any information. So that needs to be accomplished. So simply registering on the site does not allow somebody to have access to any sort of data whatsoever. But here's the register site to use for that purpose. I'll go back to my home page and click login. So I'm logged in. I have my account as an administrator. And you'll see in this upper corner it says hello and then the individual's username, which I've called administrator right now. And if you click on that link, you'll see there's an area here for manage account, and the only option that I currently have in right now is the ability to change your password. So I will build on these a little bit more as time goes on, I just have not done it right now. My focus has been working on the business logic behind it, not necessarily some of the admin functions or user functions that can be done. But this one is available for changing your password if need be. So you can get to there again by clicking on your username, and the manage account shows up. Enter your current password and then the new password, and it'll allow you to change it, and the request happens immediately. So the only other portion is this log off button that you can log off, log back in. I have my credentials being stored, so that's why they exist right there. And that's what those two links offer. And again, we're on the home page just as we were before I logged in, and you'll see this time though I have access to all these links. So there's customer orders, purchase orders, transfer orders, inventory, admin functions, and request queue. Now, all suppliers typically are only going to have access to the inventory, transfer orders, purchase orders, and customer orders. That's the default set of permissions that a vendor needs to function on the site. These other portions here, the admin functions, are more for resetting a user's password, deleting a user, adding a user to a group, edit their warehouses. There's those sorts of functions available in the admin area, and in order to get that, the appropriate security permissions will need to be applied to that person. And then the request queue is the area where all the vendor requests populate into this queue for someone to move through and process them. So every single vendor request that occurs in a customer order, a purchase order, or a transfer order will show up here in a queue-like fashion that somebody can then take and use documented procedures for how to handle each one of these individual vendor requests and process them and mark them as processed and chew through the data entry that needs to occur at that point. So this is only made available to a person when they are given the request queue admin privilege, and which is what I have right now. And that's why you see these additional links in here. Most people are not going to see them. They're only going to see inventory, transfer orders, purchase orders, and customer orders. So with that, let's start out by looking at customer orders. And in this scenario, we can see that there are 4 customer orders. And like I said before, we've got on an order, this is a type B, which stands for blanket order. On an order of type B, there's going to be multiple lines and multiple releases that are available for a customer order. Those are viewed by clicking this drill button. So this information is all about the customer order header. And it states things like which customer is this for, what type of order is this, indicating this is a blanket order, and all sorts of pertinent information here. And I'll dive into that in later videos. For right now, it's just important to note that that's what this is initially displaying, the header. And if you want to drill down into the order and see the actual lines and releases, you can do that by clicking that drill button. And you'll see this sorts of information, the CO line and the CO release. Now this is a blanket order, and that's why we see the CO line and the CO release. Now if this was a regular order, for example, as I have right here, marked by an R, what we'll see is the line number, and the release is always going to be 0. Okay, so if we added another line to this regular order, we'd have line 2 and then the pertinent information. Back to this blanket order, you can see that this right here is for an item, this item number right here, and they're ordering a quantity of 1,500. Okay, and none have been shipped on that order. If any quantities had been shipped, they would be displayed there, the date that it was due and the date that it was promised. Okay, and each one of these may have different meanings depending on the organization. I'll get into specific meanings that they have for us on a later video. The other buttons to take a look at here are requests, addresses, and notes. So the address button is where this product actually needs to be shipped. Okay, so that's what that's telling. Uh, the request is where an individual goes to create vendor requests. So a vendor request is simply made by clicking that button and clicking add, and if it was a CO shipment, and then type in the quantity, and then any notes that may be made available here, and then hitting OK. So that's how a vendor request is added. And notes. Now these notes are what's tightly integrated with Syteline. You can see that with our little helper box right there showing view Syteline notes. And if a person clicks on that, they can see now. Oh, here's a note that was named packing slip, and the 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 context of these notes can be viewed right here. And from a previous demonstration, I have some text in here, and so I'll go on ahead and delete that out and save it, and that's where notes exist. So I'll show you how these look inside Syteline so that you can see what that looks like, what on this side an individual would be using or viewing, and then what that looks like on the other side. So I've brought in Syteline, and you can see here's the customer orders form, which will correspond with what's viewed in this customer orders form on the vendor portal. So let's take a look at this customer order in particular, this first one. I'll grab that order number. I'm just doing a Control C to copy it, and I'll paste that into here, do my filter, and it brings in that order. And first thing that can be seen is here's the PO, just as it would appear right here. And then now if I go into my lines, I can see I have my one line. And if I click on releases, I can see I have 3 releases. And each one of those shows up right here. Now, the only way that a release will show up for a blanket order or a line will show up for a regular order is by the status of that release or line. So if I have this status sent to, say, complete, and I save it, and I go back over here and I'll refresh my view and look at it, I only have 2 releases now, release 1 and 2. It filters out this release because it's completed. It only looks for ordered orders. So that's important to know, because what will happen is when an individual comes into this system, say a plater, and they create a vendor request, on the back end that populates into the request queue. We then take that request and we process it in the system as a customer order shipment. We ship on that order, which then will complete the release. Once that release is completed, it drops off of the vendor portal. So inherently, this application is filtering out only the relevant information that needs to be seen, only open and active releases or lines for customer orders. Again, I take it back and I save it to status of ordered and refresh. And you'll see there it shows up again. Okay, along with my quantities right there. Everything matches as it should. The address is specified here in the drop ship. So this gets a little bit more involved on the purchase order side. There's multiple different ways or addresses that can be assigned in purchase orders, but it's kind of straightforward on the release. And this is the address that shows up. So it's not, this address on the order header. It's the one on the release. This is the address that shows up. So all the pertinent information. The other portion of it was notes. So if we look here, this is a note that we've put on the in Syteline that is now viewable. If I click on that, let me go back here. I'll go back to release 1. This note is available, and I can see it by clicking on that notes button. Okay, and I can see who made it, who last updated it. Um, this name was tagged when I updated this last time, and the pertinent information. Okay, so let's see. We'll go this direction, and I'll demonstrate how this works a little bit. And I hit save. I click on my notes, and there's that text showing up. And I mean, there's multiple places that that these notes can be done. So this note was done on the release, and if I click this and I go back to my line, I'll make a new line note. And then I'll actually go onto this order itself, and I'll make an order note. And save it. And now, when I click on my notes button, I'll see, oh, I got my line note and I got my packing slip note, but I'm missing my order note. So what happened here? What went on? Well, if I go back in here and look at my order note, you'll see I have this little tick box checked as internal. So this is stating that I only want this viewable by people who are internal to the organization. And so the vendor portal is smart enough to know to filter out any of those notes so that they do not show up in the vendor portal. And by clicking that and saving, now this note will become available to the portal. And we can see it. Here's the order header note. This note's on the order header, the line note, and the packing slip note. So on the header, line, and release, all those notes become available. And they actually are all printable too using this Excel download button. Each one of these modules or forms or units has an Excel download option. Okay, um, so everyone, even the inventory one, has one. And what this does is it allows a person to take any of the information that's viewable in their sorted queue and put it into an Excel spreadsheet so they can do anything they want with the information. So if I click this right now, it's going to create the sheet, open it, and here is my Excel sheet. Okay, so you'll see right here I have my order header note, I've got my line note, and my release notes printing in the same arena here. So this is taking the line and release notes and putting them right here on that release that you see. Okay, so I've got my line note and this is my release note. You'll see that this is the header note. But all the information that's available through the vendor portal is downloadable and viewable in this report. And to demonstrate what I mean by everything that's available here, this text box can be used to filter it, and it's done by the order number. So if I type 560778, now I've filtered it to this one order, okay, with these 3 lines. And if I click my Excel download and open it, You see, I only have that one order now, whereas before I had all four of my orders. Now I've filtered my view, and so I'm only downloading this information. And that's what this Excel download button does. It takes everything that you filtered out here via the order number and puts that into a downloadable sheet. And each one of these has that capability. So in the purchase orders, searching by the purchase order number, a person can filter this view out and only print the pertinent purchase order information. So say I wanted to do 32345 and print this PO, I click the Excel download and only that information shows up. Okay? Here's everything about that PO. And there's no transfer orders in the system, but it's the same concept. Okay? Even in inventory, I have this functionality. So that's what the Excel download button does for viewing information on any one of these. And it takes this search functionality into account with it and puts any of that information into an Excel spreadsheet, including the notes. So now the next portion to really talk about within the realm of the application is vendor requests. So let's take a break from customer orders and we'll move into purchase orders. Now remember, purchase orders are a way that we're communicating a task that we're asking be completed by a supplier. So in this scenario we've got 10 out of 10 entries listed on here, and this view actually pages these quantities, so a person can see that probably a little bit better. What we have in inventory here, we've got 17 entries, and it shows 10 at a time, and that can be adjusted here. So if I click 25, it shows all 17 of my entries. By default, it's using 10, and a person can use these paging functionality. There's a first, next, last button. It's kind of straightforward, but in the purchase orders realm, we've got exactly 10 purchase orders, ironically enough, that in this scenario we're asking for this supplier to do. And it's the same thing, I think, in here. We currently don't leverage blanket POs. The majority of all of our POs are regular POs, so you won't see you won't see releases typically in our POs, but the application will handle blanket POs. And in this scenario, we're saying we have this part number, this is the price we negotiated with you, and we want you to complete 2,250 of a plating of these. Any additional information that may need to be conveyed can be done through notes for the purchase order. And the idea is, once the supplier has completed this job or this task, they come in here and click on this requests button. Let's see. And say in this scenario we already have a vendor request that's been completed, but they can click on this and then add a vendor request. In this scenario it would be a PO receipt. Okay, so I've got a quantity of 2,250 that have been ordered. I see here from a previous request I have 1,200, and so say I did another 1,000 of them, and I want to communicate that back to my customer, which would be me. I'm a supplier logging in, and I'm communicating this back to the customer. I would just type 1,000 in here, and this is where I can put some of the notes. And again, these notes are not integrated with Syteline at all. These are notes that are specific to this vendor request. So I just click OK. All right. Now I wanted to point out one other thing here. See, we have provided this value to show if that request has been processed, and this is this is meant so that at a quick view, an individual can see if this should be reflected inside the system. Now, in an ideal scenario, this quantity received, because this transaction was processed, that quantity received would be 1200. Okay, but this we've been doing demonstrations on the system, and so even though we've marked the vendor request as being processed, it really wasn't processed, because otherwise you would see that 1200 quantity that had been done on that PO receipt would have been reflected here as 1200. Okay, and now we can see this one that we just made for 1,000, and it has not been processed, and we know that. We know that because it says it here, but we also don't have a value right here. Okay. Now, what does that mean in the scope of the application is that you can delete vendor requests that have not been processed. So if I go in and I erroneously do a vendor request, and then I'm like, oh, that's wrong, I got to get rid of it, you can go ahead and delete it, and that's fine. However, a vendor request that has been processed cannot be deleted. So if I try to delete this vendor request, it says, oop, it can't be done since it's been processed. So there's nothing that a person can do, and that was meant to build integrity into the system. Now we can go on ahead and find this vendor request in the system and mark it as unprocessed, unprocess it. We can do that, but that needs to be done in coordination with people at both sites. So if this was done erroneously, if this transaction was done erroneously and you wanted to erase it, they'd have to communicate with whoever's monitoring that request queue, and they can go in. See, I know that this is this PO right here. Okay. Oop. I know that it's that PO. I'm going to my request queue, and I'm going to look at all my processed requests. And you know what? I'll just filter it by that PO. And I can come here, and I'll just mark it as unprocessed. Okay. Now when I go back to my purchase order, I will see that this vendor request has now not been processed, and it can be deleted. And that's okay. So that's vendor requests. So again, what we've done here is taken a look at this PO line and said, I did it, and so now I did my, let's say I did 1250, just to keep our numbers round. I've done my vendor request, and I'm done. So let's go into Syteline and show what happens. I'll go in there, I'll pause the video, I'll go on in there, and I'll receive that quantity, and you can see what that looks like here. So let's walk through this a little bit inside Syteline. I'm on this purchase order, and I'll copy that. And I'm in my purchase order receiving screen here. Okay, let me change my warehouse. Okay. And I can see here's that PO line. Now it's saying receive quantity 2200. No, because I actually, per my vendor request that I've seen roll in here, so this is the vendor request that we created on that PO line. I can see that what it's actually for the quantity is 1250. So now I'm going to do my PO receipt for 1250. And then I will receive it. Now this is internally, and the supplier isn't going to see it. I just wanted to show on the PO the different views that are seen with the vendor portal as these requests are processed, and what that means. So we're doing a receipt on the item that we just did, and And now, as a supplier would come in here, they will see on that PO, well, before we go there, let's go on ahead and do this in the order that it should be accomplished. We'll process that vendor request. It drops out of my queue. I'm back to my purchase order. This is the one that we were looking at. I can see, oh, there's my 1250. And on my request, there's my 1250. It's been processed. So, you know, those exact quantities are listed right here and they match. So I know from vendor requests, um, you know, what I've done has been done and it's been done correctly. And of course I can see any one of my notes. Now, I say, oh geez, I can edit this, but yeah, it allows the notes to be edited. I do allow that, but nothing else. So none of these values can be edited. And if a person was to go and add another vendor request, say for the remaining 1,000 of this thing, and they go on ahead and do this, and now you want to change these quantities. Both of these are editable just by clicking on them. So say it was, oh no, I actually did 900. The value's updated. I'm sorry, 900. You have to press enter. Okay. Now that's changed. Obviously you can't change this because the supplier does not have access to process these requests, but the they do have access to change a source warehouse in the scenario where, say, one organization may have multiple locations. They could change those values. You can change the request category code. Right now, here's a late request or PO receipt. We're leaving that as a PO receipt. There's no need to update it. So that's how these requests are edited. So it's not as though a person necessarily needs to just delete the vendor request. They can edit it. They can edit it once it's been created. But once you know so I'm actually able to edit these currently because I am an administrator. So because I'm an administrator, I can edit these values, but a person who logs in without administrative credentials would not be able to do that. So that's the reasoning behind it. And I don't want to take away my administrative permissions to show that to you. You will be able to see that in the application, but that is why. As an administrator, I can go on ahead and edit these values. Anyone else cannot. So they would get an error similar to what you would see when attempting to delete a processed transaction. It would say it cannot be done because it has been edited. Okay, I would say no updates are allowed because the vendor request has been processed. So, but that's vendor requests, and you can see how it's meant for these things to be completed if they're done in phases. They're, 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 there can be some follow through with them. Let's go on ahead and we'll process this vendor request for the remaining quantity, and we'll actually see this drop off from the portal. So now we've done a vendor request for 1,000, and I'll go into Syteline. Here's my 1,000 quantity, and then I will receive them. And now when I refresh, this PO should have dropped off. And it's gone. Searching for that PO will bring me no results. So we've done the receipt, and if we were to look at that purchase order, now notice the status here is ordered, but if I look at the line, see that the status of this one, let me go back to my vendor request, my request queue. Let's see, line 31. Line 31, the status has been marked as filled. And since it's filled, it's not going to show up in the purchase orders of the vendor requests of the vendor portal. So I'll go on ahead and process this one inside the queue. And in essence, the work is done and it's chewed through, and now one of those tasks has dropped off of the purchase order screen. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was inventory. So, what this module means. Transfer orders, I think we'll touch on them a little bit when talking about the inventory. We went over customer orders and purchase orders. I don't have any transfer orders in here right now. Again, we'll go into more deep depth in these in later videos, but inventory kind of incorporates transfer orders. So one of the topics that came up with our discussions with suppliers was, hey, I've got this product sitting on my floor and it's been here for a long time and I don't see any demand for it. I want you to take it back. So we didn't really have a formal process for requesting that occur. And it was usually subject to somebody internally here okaying that, and it could be different people at different times. That was compounded by some of the issues we had with our inventory because we had some of these things occurring out of sequence. Our inventory numbers were constantly moving, and just because we saw a value in the system doesn't mean that that's actually what was there at that point in time. If I even stand back, let's stand back a little bit further. One of the main functions behind this vendor portal for outside services is really to allow us to have things happen in their proper sequence. So that's really, standing back, one of the big drivers behind this. Because, for example, say on a customer orders end where we have a scenario and that outside supplier is shipping on a customer order, and based on what they're seeing in our customer site, they might have sent product out the door and we aren't aware of it. So in that scenario, we would look at our system and see, oh, we have X quantity of this product, but we don't, because that order was sent out several days before and we're just waiting for the paperwork to come through via an email or such from that supplier so that we can go on ahead and create the order and then ship on that order. So that was also compounded by purchase orders. We didn't realize the inventory was finished until we would see that it had been shipped. So the purchase order would really be filled when we shipped it. So there's a lot of those different small minor things that would occur in the flow of product that needed to be resolved. And what our goal is to get closer to real-time inventory so that we can make better decisions and carry less of it. And that's our goal. And so the first thing that really needed to be accomplished was, let's put all these things in their proper sequence. So so that we can see as things are moving exactly what's going on within the organization. And that's kind of one of the drivers behind this vendor portal. Now, the inventory module, back to this inventory module, was made to start having a dialogue with regards to what we're showing is on their site and then what they're actually seeing on their site, and if there's a difference. So, we're stating here, hey, we have this product on location at your site, and it's showing that we have, this quantity in here. Now, if there is quantities allocated to customer orders, it would show up. If there's quantities in transit, that would show up as well. But the general focus is this actually what we have? You know, and A number one, do I want it here? If I don't want it here, then why don't I do a request to have you create a transfer order to get that off of my floor? Now, if it is here and the quantities don't agree, then I want to do a vendor request to do an adjustment on that inventory so that we both can uh, look at the same number and agree that these quantities are in fact what we have when we're seeing them there. One other thing to note with the inventory is that you can really only start to have a dialogue on what you're seeing with your inventory once the purchase orders portion has been dialed in. So once all the purchase orders are processed, then that's when you can really start to have more of a constructive dialogue as to what you're seeing in inventory, because those purchase orders are going to drive us in our system to do the behaviors which are going to reflect uh, the accurate quantities of finished goods and unfinished goods in this inventory section. And so you can see here, for reasons I'm not going to get into, we annotate a unfinished product with a dash MFG suffix. Okay, so I can see here, oh, I've got 3,110 unfinished of these, and I have 1,000 finished right here. Okay. Now, if say these have been sitting here for a while and I want to get rid of them, it's just a matter of doing a vendor request and say, in this case, I'm requesting a transfer order, and the quantity that I have listed, ooh, I can't see it, little limitation of jQuery, of 1,000, and I want to get them off of my site. I can type 1,000 in here, okay, and now this will show up in here as a transfer order request, which would spur somebody internal here to create a transfer order, which would then show up in here. That transfer order would be listed in here, and a vendor request to do a transfer order shipment would be created once that product was left the dock from the supplier's site. So that's sort of the loop that would all bring about. Um, Now, in another scenario, say I disagree with inventory, I want to do an adjustment, and what do I have? What do I have for that quantity? Let's see if I can't see it. 3,010, and say I want to do an adjustment for say 10 of these. Um, Again, that shows up in my request queue as a inventory adjustment request. So all these different types of, of vendor requests start populating into these queues, into this one queue. And again, from there it becomes a data entry function really to do them. So all of these processes are documented for what do we do if we get a transfer order request? What do we do if we have an inventory adjustment request? What do we do if we have a customer order shipment vendor request? What do we do if we have a purchase order receipt vendor request? And all an individual needs to do then is follow those processes and process these queue vendor requests in this queue, and all the information will snap into line. So we've got everything operating in sequence based on the live information that our suppliers give us. The system's being updated, and and now we can start to make more intelligent decisions on how we're going to produce product. The last thing that I wanted to make mention of, I know I said the last thing was inventory, but I forgot to go over the idea behind the warehouses in the system. So let's go back to the customer orders screen and talk about that a little bit, because this is integral to how um, the application segments out information for particular users. So let's go to this regular order that I had created earlier as a demonstration, and you can see that all these other ones are for this warehouse, okay? And this one is for this warehouse. So you may say, well, what's going on? How does that work? Well, it doesn't look at the warehouse that's assigned on the header. It doesn't look at this warehouse. So if I go to this order, we'll just find that one, and I look at this line, I can see it's looking at this warehouse right here. Okay? So if I wanted to, what's my status? And this one's ordered. In order to make any changes to this, I need to zero it. Okay. Now if I go on ahead and change this to a different warehouse, and then I come into the system and refresh, that order is going to be gone. It's no longer there. Because the application looks at the warehouses that are assigned to the user and only displays those orders. Okay, so if I go back to this and now save it, this user that I'm logged into, this administrator user, I've only assigned the warehouse KMC. So that's the only orders or purchase orders or inventory or transfer orders that I'm going to see are those things that relate to my specific warehouse. So when I refresh this, I can see here's my order again. And not only does it pertains to the particular warehouse, but the particular warehouse on the release. And that's because what goes on here is we set the warehouse for this order in this area. So I've got this set as main right now. And so when I go in here and make a line, by default, it fills in main. Okay? Now, if I change that default over here, let me refresh. If I change this default now, and I hit save, okay, and now I create another release, that default is what fills in. So it doesn't make sense to look at the order header for the warehouse, since all that's doing is really specifying a default. It does make sense to set it on the release or the line level, because that's what actually pertains. So in essence, I could have multiple orders for different warehouses, or multiple releases or lines for different warehouses on the same order, and the application is going to sort them out appropriately. So that was the last thing I wanted to touch on with requests to the vendor portal. So I hope that that provided enough of an overview. I will be releasing later videos that go into each one of these topics a little bit more in depth at a later time. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and I hope this helped.